Hello everyone. Enjoy this relaxing moment while you watch. The winter winds howled down the narrow alleyways of the city, biting at Maria's thin, tattered coat. She clutched her son, Daniel, tightly against her chest, wrapping him in the only blanket they owned. The 7-year-old boy shivered but didn't complain. His wide, innocent eyes gazed up at his mother, full of trust despite the harshness of their reality. Maria glanced around the street, her stomach twisting with hunger and fear. She had lost everything: her husband to a cruel illness, her home to the relentless march of unpaid bills, and her dignity to the streets. But Daniel was her beacon of hope. His laughter, his small, fragile hand in hers, made every freezing night and empty belly bearable. "Hold on, my love," she whispered, brushing a strand of dirty blonde hair from his forehead. "We'll find something to eat soon." As she spoke, a black limousine pulled up to the curb, its sleek exterior gleaming even in the dim streetlights. Maria instinctively drew Daniel closer. Such cars rarely meant kindness in her world. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, her high heels clicking against the pavement. The woman was stunning, her fur coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, her diamond earrings catching the light. She exuded wealth and power. Maria felt a pang of envy but quickly pushed it aside. This woman lived in a world far removed from her own. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice soft yet commanding. "Are you homeless?" Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The woman's eyes shifted to Daniel, and Maria's protective instincts flared. She didn't like the way the woman was looking at her son, like he was something precious, something she wanted. "My name is Olivia Thornhill," the woman said, smiling. "This is my husband, Henry." Another figure emerged from the car, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a sharp suit. His gaze was colder, more calculating. Maria said nothing, her grip on Daniel tightened. "We were just coming from a charity gala," Olivia continued. "Helping underprivileged families like yours." She paused, her smile growing wider. "Your son is beautiful. What's his name?" "Daniel," Maria said cautiously. "Daniel," Olivia repeated as if savoring the name. "How old is he?" 7. Olivia exchanged a glance with her husband, something unspoken passing between them. Then she turned back to Maria. "We've been looking for a child," Olivia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "To adopt." Maria's heart stopped. "He's not for adoption." Olivia laughed lightly, as if Maria's response were a joke. "Oh, of course not. But think about it, he could have a better life. A warm bed, good food, the best schools." "I said no," Maria snapped, her voice firmer now. Henry stepped forward, pulling a checkbook from his pocket. "We'll pay you," he said, his tone brusque. "Name your price." Maria's face flushed with anger and humiliation. She had been offered many things in her life: charity, pity, disdain, but never this. Never money in exchange for her child. "You think you can buy him?" she spat, her voice trembling. "He's my son, not a commodity." Henry's jaw tightened, but Olivia held up a hand, silencing him. "We're only trying to help," she said soothingly. "Think about it. He could have everything you can't give him." "I can give him love," Maria said, her voice breaking. "And that's more than enough." Olivia's smile faltered, replaced by a look of frustration. "You're making a mistake," she said, her tone sharper now. Maria turned her back on them, pulling Daniel away. "Come on, sweetheart." But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. And she was right. The Thornhill estate sat like a jewel on the city's outskirts, an opulent mansion surrounded by sprawling gardens and high iron gates. Inside, Olivia Thornhill paced the grand living room, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Henry sat on a leather armchair nearby, his fingers steepled as he watched his wife with a mixture of impatience and concern. "She said no," Olivia hissed, her voice trembling with frustration. "Can you believe it? That woman refused me." Henry sighed. "You can't just expect people to hand over their children, Olivia, even if they're desperate. She's not fit to raise that boy." Olivia shot back, her eyes flashing. "Did you see her? Barely clothed, living on the streets. That child deserves better." Henry leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. And you think taking him against her will is the solution? This isn't some charity auction where you can bid higher and win. Olivia stopped pacing and turned to face him. If we don't act, that boy will grow up in filth, hungry and unloved. We could give him everything. A home, an education, a future. Henry considered her words, then sighed again. What are you suggesting? A sly smile crept across Olivia's face. We don't need her permission. Not really. Henry frowned. What do you mean? She's homeless, Henry. A nobody in the eyes of the law. We could make her look unfit, create a case for custody. Henry's eyes narrowed. That's a slippery slope, Olivia. Even with our resources, it's risky. Olivia crossed the room and placed a manicured hand on his shoulder. We've faced worse challenges, haven't we? And come out on top? All I need is your support. Henry sighed, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But we need to be careful. One misstep, and this could blow up in our faces. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Henry set their plan into motion. With their wealth and influence, they manipulated the system to portray Maria as an unfit mother. They hired private investigators to dig into her past, uncovering every misstep and hardship she'd endured. They bribed a social worker to file a report claiming Daniel was malnourished and in danger under Maria's care. At the same time, they began planting seeds of doubt within the community. News articles subtly suggested an increase in child neglect cases among the homeless population, accompanied by carefully staged photographs of Maria and Daniel taken from a distance. Maria noticed the change almost immediately. Strangers began treating her with hostility, whispering and pointing whenever she walked down the street. Shopkeepers refused to sell her food, accusing her of loitering. Even the shelter where she occasionally found refuge turned her away, citing space issues. One cold evening, as Maria sat on the curb with Daniel wrapped in her arms, 2 police officers approached. Maria Lopez? One of them asked. Maria looked up, her heart pounding. Yes? We have a warrant for your arrest, the officer said, his tone devoid of sympathy. You're being charged with endangering the welfare of a child. What? Maria gasped, clutching Daniel tighter. I haven't done anything wrong. The officer stepped forward, his expression grim. Ma'am, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Daniel began to cry, clinging to his mother. Mommy, what's happening? It's okay, baby, Maria said, her voice shaking. I won't let them take you. But she was powerless to stop them. The officers pried Daniel from her arms, ignoring her screams and protests. As they hauled her to her feet and placed her in handcuffs, Maria caught a glimpse of Olivia Thornhills standing across the street, watching the scene unfold with a satisfied smile. Back at the Thornhill estate, Olivia celebrated her victory. Daniel had been placed in temporary foster care, coincidentally with a family closely tied to the Thornhills. It was only a matter of time before the court granted Olivia and Henry permanent custody. We've done the right thing, Olivia said, sipping a glass of champagne in the grand dining room. That boy will thank us one day. Henry wasn't so sure. Let's hope this doesn't come back to haunt us. It won't, Olivia said confidently. Maria Lopez is out of the picture. Permanently. But Olivia underestimated the strength of a mother's love and the lengths Maria would go to in order to get her son back. The cold, gray walls of the holding cell were as unyielding as the despair that gripped Maria. Her wrists throbbed from the too tight handcuffs, and her heart felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. She couldn't stop replaying the moment when they'd ripped Daniel from her arms, his cries echoing in her ears like a haunting melody. Maria sat on the hard bench, staring blankly at the floor. Other women shared the cell with her, some hardened by years of incarceration, others trembling with fear. She wasn't sure where she fit in, she only knew she had to find a way out. She had to get back to Daniel. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped her out of her thoughts. A female officer stopped outside the bars, her face stern but not unkind. Maria Lopez? The officer asked. Maria stood slowly. Yes. You have a visitor? Maria's brow furrowed. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her family was long gone, and she had no friends to speak of. Still, She followed the officer down the dimly lit corridor, her mind racing. Could it be someone who had seen the injustice? Someone willing to help? She was led to a small room with a single table and 2 chairs. On the other side of the glass partition, a woman in a neatly pressed uniform waited. Her auburn hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her sharp green eyes assessed Maria with a mix of curiosity and compassion. "I'm Officer Clara Hayes," the woman said once Maria was seated. "I've been assigned to your case." Maria said nothing, unsure whether to trust the stranger. Clara leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "I don't believe the charges against you. I've seen cases like this before. Fabricated evidence, manipulated witnesses. I want to help you." Maria's eyes filled with tears, the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in days. "They took my son," she choked out. "They just took him." Clara nodded. "I know. And I'm going to do everything I can to get him back." Clara began her investigation that same day. As she sifted through the files, she noticed glaring inconsistencies in the reports. The social worker's statements were vague and lacked proper documentation. Witness testimonies seemed rehearsed, and there were no concrete details to back up the allegations. The deeper Clara dug, the more convinced she became that Maria had been set up. But by whom? And what? Her first break came when she traced the foster family currently housing Daniel. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, had close ties to the Thornhills. They were old family friends. Clara's suspicions deepened. "I knew it," she muttered to herself. This wasn't about Maria's parenting. It was about Daniel. Meanwhile, Olivia Thornhill was growing restless. She had expected Maria to disappear quietly, but the woman's resilience was proving to be an obstacle. Worse, Clara's investigation was beginning to draw attention. "We need to handle this," Olivia told Henry one evening as they sat in their lavish dining room. "That officer is poking around where she doesn't belong." Henry frowned. "What are you suggesting?" Olivia's eyes hardened. "We can't afford any loose ends." Henry hesitated. "Olivia, we've already crossed enough lines. If this gets out..." "It won't," Olivia snapped. "We'll make sure of it." She made a call that night, contacting a private contractor who specialized in eliminating problems. The plan was simple. Maria would have a tragic accident in custody, and the case would quietly fade away. Back in the holding cell, Maria was beginning to notice strange things. Meals were late or missing altogether. Guards glared at her with open hostility, some muttering under their breath as they passed. One night, she woke to find her cot drenched in water. No one offered an explanation. The hostility escalated until one day, during yard time, another inmate approached her. The woman, tall and muscular, loomed over Maria with a menacing grin. "You're making trouble for the wrong people," the woman said, her voice low and threatening. "Might want to think about keeping your mouth shut." Maria stared at her, fear coursing through her veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." The woman leaned in closer. "Sure you don't. Just remember, accidents happen all the time in here." Before Maria could respond, a whistle blew, signaling the end of yard time. She hurried back to her cell, her heart pounding. Someone wanted her silenced. That night, Maria lay awake, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to stay silent. Daniel's life depended on her speaking up. But how could she fight back when every move seemed to bring her closer to danger? Her answer came in the form of Clara. The officer visited her the next morning, her expression grave. "I found something," Clara said as they sat in the visitation room. "The Thornhills have ties to almost everyone involved in your case. The social worker, the Reynolds family, even some of the officers who arrested you." Maria's hands trembled. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you're in more danger than I thought," Clara admitted. "But I'm not giving up. I've contacted a journalist I trust. If we can get your story out, the public pressure might force the system to take a closer look." Maria's eyes widened. "You'd do that for me?" Clara smiled faintly. "Everyone deserves justice, Maria. Even people the world has forgotten." Later that day, Clara was reviewing the evidence in her office when she received a call from a colleague. "There's been an incident at the jail," the voice on the other end said. Clara's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident?" "A fight broke out in Maria Lopez's cell block. She's in the infirmary." Clara was at the jail within the hour. She found Maria lying on a cot, her face bruised and her lips split. The sight filled her with rage. What happened? Clara demanded. Maria looked up at her weakly. They came after me. I think it was a warning. Clara's jaw tightened. She knew this was no ordinary fight. It was a message from the Thornhills. They were getting desperate. Don't worry, Clara said firmly. I'm getting you out of here. Maria shook her head. They'll find me, Clara. They have too much power. Not if we expose them first, Clara said. I've got everything I need. We're going to take them down. As Clara worked tirelessly to build her case, Olivia Thornhill began to feel the walls closing in. Maria's resilience, combined with Clara's determination, was a threat she hadn't anticipated. And this time, money and influence might not be enough to save her. Maria sat in the corner of her cell, her bruised face hidden behind her trembling hands. The fight had been brutal, and though she survived, it was clear the message was meant to break her spirit. Yet, as the pain throbbed in her ribs, her resolve only grew stronger. Daniel needed her. That was all that mattered. Across town, Clara Hayes sat in her cluttered office, papers and photos strewn across her desk. Every thread of evidence she pulled unraveled a deeper web of corruption. The Thornhills' influence reached farther than she had anticipated. Police officers, social workers, judges. They had orchestrated a near-perfect operation to strip Maria of her son and make it appear legal. Clara picked up her phone and dialed. Karen, it's Clara. I need your help. A journalist's interest. Karen Olmsted was a seasoned investigative journalist known for her exposés on corruption and systemic injustice. When Clara laid out the details of Maria's case, Karen's curiosity turned to outrage. This is huge, Karen said, jotting down notes. We need to get Maria's story out before the Thornhills bury it completely. Clara hesitated. We have to be careful. The Thornhills are powerful, and they're already trying to silence Maria. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. Let them try. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it. The two women began crafting a strategy to reveal the Thornhills' crimes to the public. Clara provided documentation, the falsified reports, the bribes, and the connections between the Thornhills and various officials. Karen, in turn, prepared a compelling narrative that would humanize Maria and expose the greed and corruption that had torn her family apart. The Thornhills strike back. Meanwhile, Olivia Thornhill paced the marble floors of her mansion, her calm facade cracking under the weight of Clara's growing investigation. They're digging too deep, Olivia said, slamming her glass of wine onto the table. That officer won't stop. Henry, seated across from her, rubbed his temples. We've already done more than enough damage, Olivia. Maybe it's time to let this go. Let it go? Olivia snapped. Do you have any idea what will happen if this goes public? We'll lose everything, our reputation, our money, our freedom. Henry hesitated. He had always been Olivia's accomplice, but her obsession was starting to scare him. Still, he couldn't deny the danger they faced. If Clara succeeded, their carefully constructed lives would crumble. We need to stop her, Olivia said firmly. And Maria? An attempted assassination. Maria was restless that night, unable to sleep. The cold steel cot pressed against her back, and her bruises ached with every movement. She had tried to stay hopeful, but her faith was waning. Clara had promised to help, but Maria feared time was running out. In the early hours of the morning, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Maria sat up, her instincts screaming danger. Moments later, a shadow appeared outside her cell. It wasn't a guard. The figure unlocked the door and stepped inside. Maria's breath caught as the man, a burly figure with a scar running down his cheek, advanced toward her. You've caused a lot of trouble, he said, his voice low and menacing. Time to put an end to it? Maria's heart raced. She backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The man lunged and Maria braced herself, when suddenly, a loud shout echoed through the cell block. Freeze! Police! It was Clara. The man turned, but Clara was faster. She drew her weapon and aimed it at him. Step away from her now. The man hesitated, then bolted for the door. Clara fired a warning shot, and the sound reverberated through the halls. Guards rushed in moments later, apprehending the intruder. Clara ran to Maria, helping her to her feet. "Are you okay?" Maria nodded, her voice shaking. "I think so. Thank you." Clara's face was grim. They just made their biggest mistake. This attempt proves everything we've been saying. Let's get you out of here. Escape and shelter. Clara pulled every string she could to have Maria transferred to a secure location. She used the attempted attack as leverage, arguing that Maria's life was in immediate danger. Within hours, Maria was moved to a safe house under Clara's supervision. For the first time in weeks, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. She was safe, for now, and Clara was more determined than ever to bring the Thornhills to justice. "I have a plan," Clara told Maria as they sat in the small, sparsely furnished house. "Karen's going public with your story. Once it's out, the Thornhills won't be able to hide." Maria nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. "What if they hurt Daniel?" Clara placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They won't. I've already contacted Child Protective Services. They're opening an investigation into the Reynolds family. We'll get him back." The truth unveiled. Karen's exposé was published the next morning, appearing on the front page of the city's most prominent newspaper. The headline read, "Wealth and Deceit, the Thornhills' Sinister Plot to Steal a Mother's Child." The article detailed Maria's plight, the fabricated evidence, and the Thornhills' web of corruption. It included interviews with anonymous sources who confirmed the couple's unethical practices. Clara's name wasn't mentioned, but her evidence formed the backbone of the story. The public reaction was immediate. Outrage erupted across social media, with thousands calling for an investigation into the Thornhills. Protests sprang up outside their estate, and journalists camped at their gates, demanding answers. Olivia was livid. "How dare they?" she fumed, pacing the living room. "They're ruining us." Henry, pale and shaken, said nothing. For the first time, he realized just how far they had fallen. Desperate move. Desperate to salvage their reputation, Olivia and Henry held a press conference. Olivia wore her most somber expression, her voice quivering as she addressed the crowd. "These accusations are baseless," she said, clutching Henry's hand for effect. "We've only ever wanted to provide a loving home for Daniel. The real tragedy here is the system failing a vulnerable child." But the public wasn't convinced. Reporters bombarded the couple with questions about the evidence Karen had presented. Olivia faltered under the scrutiny, her carefully constructed lies beginning to unravel. A mother's resolve. At the safe house, Maria watched the press conference on an old TV. Her hands clenched into fists as she listened to Olivia twist the truth. "I'm not letting them win," Maria said, her voice firm. "Daniel needs to know I fought for him." Clara nodded. "And you will. The court hearing is next week. We'll expose everything." Maria was one step closer to reclaiming her son, but the battle was far from over. The Thornhills still had resources and connections, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. Would justice prevail, or would the Thornhills find a way to escape the consequences of their actions? The day of the custody hearing arrived under a gray, overcast sky. Inside the courthouse, tension crackled in the air like a brewing storm. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and curious onlookers who had followed Maria's story in the news. The Thornhill case had become a flashpoint, symbolizing the divide between wealth and privilege on one side and resilience and justice on the other. Maria sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands trembling but her eyes resolute. Beside her was Clara Hayes, acting as her key witness, and a pro bono attorney, David Mercer, who had taken her case after reading Karen's exposé. Across the aisle, Olivia and Henry Thornhill sat stiffly in their tailored suits, their lawyer exuding arrogance as he prepared to dismantle Maria's claims. Opening statements. The judge, an elderly man with a weathered face and a reputation for fairness, called the court to order. David Mercer rose to deliver his opening statement. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and clear, "this case is about more than a custody dispute. It's about power, manipulation, and the lengths to which some people will go to exploit a broken system. My client, Maria Lopez, has been falsely accused, wrongfully imprisoned, and cruelly separated from her child. We intend to prove not only her fitness as a mother but also the egregious misconduct of the defendants. The courtroom murmured in agreement, the public largely siding with Maria. The Thornhills lawyer, Charles Whitmore, stood next. His tone was cold and clinical. Your Honor, the defendants are loving, responsible citizens who sought only to provide a better life for a child in need. The plaintiff's accusations are baseless and inflammatory, designed to smear the reputations of my clients. We will demonstrate that Maria Lopez is unfit to care for her son and that the Thornhills acted in the child's best interest. The judge nodded, signaling the start of the proceedings. Maria's testimony. Maria was the first to take the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted her life on the streets, the struggles of raising Daniel, and the day he was taken from her. I may not have money, she said, her voice breaking, but I've always given Daniel love, care, and everything I could. He's my world. They took him from me like I was nothing, like he was something they could buy. Charles Whitmore rose for cross-examination. His questions were sharp, designed to paint Maria as unstable and negligent. Ms. Lopez, he said, pacing the floor, you've admitted to being homeless. How do you propose to provide for a child without a stable home or income? Maria's hands tightened on the edge of the witness stand. I've been working toward finding stable housing. I've applied for jobs. I've never stopped trying to give Daniel a better life. Yet you failed, Whitmore said coldly. Isn't it true that Daniel was seen scavenging for food on multiple occasions? Maria's face flushed with shame. That was only when I had no choice. I never let him go hungry. Whitmore smirked, satisfied with the seeds of doubt he'd sown, and returned to his seat. Clara's evidence. Clara Hayes was the next witness. She took the stand with confidence, her crisp uniform and composed demeanor commanding respect. As she laid out the evidence she had gathered, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. I investigated the circumstances of Maria Lopez's arrest, Clara began. What I found was a coordinated effort to discredit her as a mother. The Thornhills used their influence to bribe a social worker, fabricate reports, and manipulate witnesses. Clara presented documents to back her claims, emails between Olivia Thornhill and the social worker, bank records showing suspicious payments, and the falsified report that had led to Maria's arrest. The evidence was damning. Whitmore attempted to discredit Clara's testimony, accusing her of bias and overstepping her duties as an officer. You seem quite invested in this case, Officer Hayes, Whitmore said. Why? Clara met his gaze without flinching. Because justice is my duty. And because no one, rich or poor, should be above the law. The Thornhills' defense. Olivia Thornhill took the stand next, her demeanor a careful blend of sorrow and indignation. She spoke of her desire to rescue Daniel from a life of poverty, painting herself as a benevolent savior. We only wanted to help, Olivia said, dabbing at imaginary tears with a silk handkerchief. That boy deserves a future Maria Lopez could never provide. David Mercer's cross-examination was brutal. He confronted Olivia with the emails Clara had uncovered, as well as her connection to the foster family housing Daniel. Mrs. Thornhill, Mercer said, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, is it true that you arranged for Daniel to be placed with the Reynolds family, who are close friends of yours? Olivia hesitated, her polished facade cracking. I only suggested they could provide temporary care. Temporary? Mercer raised an eyebrow. Or did you intend to adopt him all along? Olivia's silence spoke volumes. Henry Thornhill was next, but his testimony was weak. Clearly uncomfortable, he struggled to justify their actions without incriminating himself further. The breaking point. The trial reached its climax when Karen Olmsted, the journalist, testified. She presented the findings from her exposé, corroborating Clara's evidence and adding new layers to the Thornhills' corruption. As Karen spoke, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge's stern expression betrayed his growing disapproval of the Thornhills, while the public support for Maria swelled. But the final blow came when a surprise witness took the stand, a former employee of the Thornhills who had been coerced into helping fabricate evidence. The man, nervous but determined, admitted to his role and detailed the Thornhills scheme. They told me to do it, he said, his voice trembling. They said Maria didn't deserve to have a kid. I didn't want to, but they threatened me. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge called for order. The verdict. After days of testimony, the judge delivered his verdict. The courtroom fell silent as he spoke. After careful consideration of the evidence, it is clear that Maria Lopez has been the victim of a grave injustice. The charges against her are baseless, and I hereby order her immediate release. Furthermore, custody of Daniel Lopez is to be restored to his mother. Maria's tears flowed freely as the judge turned his attention to the Thornhills. As for Mr. and Mrs. Thornhill, their actions represent a gross abuse of power and privilege. I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. This court will not tolerate such misconduct. The gallery erupted in cheers, and Maria was surrounded by supporters as she left the courtroom, her heart bursting with relief and gratitude. As Maria held Daniel in her arms for the first time in months, she whispered, "I'll never let them take you away again." Across the city, Olivia and Henry Thornhill faced the collapse of their empire, their wealth and influence no longer enough to shield them from the consequences of their actions. Justice had been served, but the journey wasn't over. For Maria and Daniel, it was a new beginning, one forged in resilience, hope, and the unwavering bond between a mother and her child. The aftermath of the trial rippled across the city like a tidal wave. The Thornhills, once hailed as paragons of wealth and influence, were now disgraced, their names synonymous with corruption and deceit. For Maria, the courtroom victory was a monumental step, but it was only the beginning of her journey toward rebuilding her life and securing a future for her son. The Thornhills under investigation. In the weeks following the trial, the district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation into Olivia and Henry Thornhill. Charges of bribery, fraud, and child trafficking loomed over them. The public's outrage, fueled by Karen Olmsted's continued coverage, ensured that the authorities could not afford to let the case slide. The Thornhills' once loyal allies began to distance themselves. Business partners withdrew their investments, charitable organizations severed ties, and their once coveted invitations to high society events dried up. Their mansion, once the scene of lavish parties and opulence, now felt like a gilded cage. Henry Thornhill, burdened by guilt and the weight of his wife's relentless ambition, became increasingly withdrawn. Olivia, on the other hand, refused to accept the reality of their situation. "We can fight this," she insisted one evening, pacing their now empty living room. The furniture had been sold to cover mounting legal fees. "We have the best lawyers. They'll get us out of this." Henry shook his head. "Face it, Olivia. It's over. We've lost everything." Maria's new beginning. Maria, meanwhile, was adjusting to life outside the shadows of poverty and fear. With Clara Hayes's help, she secured temporary housing through a community program that supported single mothers. Daniel, once a frightened and confused child, began to blossom under Maria's care. Their tiny apartment was modest but filled with warmth. Daniel's laughter echoed through the walls as he played with the toys donated by neighbors who had rallied around Maria's cause. "I missed you, Mama," Daniel said one evening, hugging her tightly. Maria kissed the top of his head, tears welling in her eyes. "I missed you too, my love. But we're together now, and nothing will ever change that." Clara visited often, becoming more than just a protector to Maria. She was a friend, a sister, and a mentor. On one visit, she handed Maria a folder. "What's this?" Maria asked. "Job applications," Clara said with a smile. "I know you're ready for this. There's a position at a community center that I think you'd love. They're looking for someone to work with children." Maria's heart swelled with gratitude. "Clara, I don't know how to thank you." "You've already done that," Clara replied. "By not giving up." The media frenzy. As the Thornhills' trial loomed closer, Karen Olmsted continued to expose new layers of their corruption. Articles detailing their schemes to manipulate adoption agencies, launder money, and intimidate witnesses kept the public's attention firmly on the case. Karen's reporting also highlighted the broader issues of class disparity and systemic failures that allowed people like the Thornhills to exploit the vulnerable. Her work sparked a wave of reforms, with lawmakers introducing legislation to protect children in foster care and hold wealthy individuals accountable for abuses of power. For Maria, Karen's work was a bittersweet reminder of her ordeal. "She's doing good work," Maria told Clara one evening. "But sometimes I wish the world would forget about me." Clara nodded. "I understand. But your story is helping others. And it's proof that people like the Thornhills don't always win." A betrayal within. As the Thornhills trial date approached, Henry Thornhill made a stunning decision. Overwhelmed by guilt and eager to salvage what little integrity he had left, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. "I can't do this anymore, Olivia," Henry said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I'm not going to prison for you." Olivia was livid. "You coward! You're turning your back on me?" "I'm telling the truth," he shot back. "Something we should have done a long time ago." Henry's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. He revealed the inner workings of their scheme, from the bribes to the fabricated reports, and even detailed Olivia's attempts to intimidate Maria and Clara. His betrayal sealed Olivia's fate. The Thornhills trial. The trial was a spectacle, drawing crowds and media attention that rivaled even Maria's custody case. Olivia Thornhill, defiant to the end, maintained her innocence, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Witness after witness testified against her, including Henry. Clara took the stand once more, recounting the night Maria's life was nearly ended in a failed assassination attempt. Karen Olmsted presented a timeline of the Thornhills' misdeeds, complete with incriminating documents and financial records. When the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps. Olivia Thornhill was convicted on all charges, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Henry, having cooperated, received a lighter sentence of 10 years but would forever bear the stain of his crimes. Justice restored. For Maria, the verdict was a moment of vindication. As she watched Olivia being led away in handcuffs, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "She can't hurt anyone anymore," Maria whispered to Clara. "No, she can't," Clara agreed. "It's over." The path forward. With the Thornhills out of the picture, Maria focused on building a stable life for herself and Daniel. She accepted the job at the community center, where she found purpose in helping other children who had experienced hardship. Her bond with Daniel grew stronger every day, their love unshaken by the trials they had endured. Clara continued to visit, her friendship with Maria deepening. The two women often reflected on their journey, marveling at how far they had come. "You're stronger than you know, Maria," Clara said one afternoon as they watched Daniel play in the park. Maria smiled, her heart full for the first time in years. "I had to be." For him, a legacy of hope. Karen's final article on the Thornhills' downfall ended with a tribute to Maria. In the face of unimaginable adversity, Maria Lopez stood tall. Her fight was not just for her son but for every mother who has ever been silenced by wealth and power. Her courage has inspired change, proving that justice, though often elusive, is not impossible. Maria read the article with tears in her eyes. She folded the paper and placed it in a box with Daniel's keepsakes, a reminder of their journey and the strength it took to reclaim their lives. As she tucked Daniel into bed that night, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mama, are we safe now?" Maria kissed his forehead. "Yes, mi amor. We're safe. And we're free." Months passed after the Thornhills trial, and life in the city began to settle into a new rhythm. For Maria and Daniel, every day felt like a gift, a chance to heal, grow, and dream of a future that had once seemed impossible. But the scars of their ordeal ran deep, and the process of rebuilding was as challenging as it was rewarding. A new chapter for Maria. Maria's job at the community center became more than just a source of income, it was a sanctuary. The center, nestled in a vibrant yet struggling neighborhood, provided a safe space for children to play, learn, and thrive. Many of these children came from backgrounds similar to Daniel's, and Maria poured her heart into giving them the love and care she knew they needed. She quickly became a favorite among the staff and families, known for her warmth, patience, and unwavering dedication. The director of the center, an older woman named Evelyn James, saw great potential in Maria. "You have a gift, Maria," Evelyn said one afternoon as they worked together to plan an after-school program. You understand these kids in a way that most people can't? Maria smiled, a hint of shyness still lingering in her demeanor. I just want to help. They remind me of Daniel. Evelyn nodded. And you're doing more than helping. You're giving them hope. Daniel's transformation. For Daniel, life in their new home was a revelation. No longer burdened by the fear and uncertainty of living on the streets, he began to flourish. He made friends at school, excelled in his classes, and developed a love for drawing, often spending hours sketching pictures of his mother and the life they were building together. One evening, as Maria tucked him into bed, Daniel held up a drawing he'd been working on. It showed a small house with a garden, a bright sun in the sky, and two figures, one tall and one small, standing hand in hand. This is us, Mama, he said proudly. Our home. Maria's heart swelled. She hugged him tightly, whispering, It's beautiful, Daniel. Just like you. Clara's continued fight. Clara Hayes remained a steadfast presence in Maria's life. Despite the closure of the Thornhills case, Clara was more determined than ever to address the systemic issues that had allowed their abuse of power to occur. She partnered with Karen Olmsted to launch a campaign advocating for reforms in the foster care system and greater accountability for those in positions of privilege. Their work drew national attention, sparking conversations and legislative efforts to close loopholes and protect vulnerable children. I couldn't have done this without you, Karen told Clara during one of their strategy meetings. Your courage, your willingness to stand up for what's right, it's inspiring. Clara shook her head modestly. It's not about me. It's about making sure no one else goes through what Maria did. A city united. The Thornhills' downfall had a profound impact on the community. The case had exposed deep inequalities and injustices, prompting residents to rally together to demand change. Grassroots organizations sprang up, focusing on everything from housing and education to legal aid for the underprivileged. Maria found herself at the center of this movement, often invited to speak at events and share her story. Though public speaking was far outside her comfort zone, she recognized the importance of using her voice. At one such event, held in a packed community hall, Maria stood nervously at the podium. She took a deep breath and began to speak. I never thought I'd be standing here today, she said, her voice trembling slightly. For a long time I felt invisible, like my son and I didn't matter. But thanks to the kindness and courage of people who believed in us, we found justice. And now, I want to make sure that every mother, every child, has the chance to be seen, heard, and valued. Her words were met with thunderous applause, and Maria felt a sense of pride she had never known before. The Thornhills in prison. Life for Olivia and Henry Thornhill in prison was a far cry from the luxury they had once known. Olivia, accustomed to being pampered and revered, struggled to adapt to the harsh realities of incarceration. Her attempts to assert dominance among the inmates were met with scorn, and she quickly found herself isolated. Henry, on the other hand, sought redemption. He spent his time reading, volunteering for prison programs, and reflecting on his actions. Though he knew he could never undo the harm he had caused, he hoped to one day earn forgiveness, not from society, but from himself. The Thornhills story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and privilege. A reunion of friends. One warm spring afternoon, Clara, Karen, and Evelyn joined Maria and Daniel for a picnic in the park. The atmosphere was light and joyful, filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. As they sat together on the grass, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed. Sometimes it feels like a dream, she said. I keep waiting to wake up and find myself back on the streets. Clara placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You've earned this, Maria. You fought for it. And now it's yours. Karen nodded. Your story has touched so many lives. You're not just a survivor, you're a beacon of hope. Maria looked at Daniel, who was chasing butterflies with a group of children. Her heart swelled with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without all of you, she said. You gave me the strength to keep going. A new dream. That evening, as Maria put Daniel to bed, he asked a question that caught her off guard. Mama, do you think we could get a house one day? Like the one in my drawing? Maria smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "One day, mi amor. We'll work hard and we'll make it happen." Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with trust. "I know we will." As Maria lay in bed that night, she allowed herself to dream, for the first time in years. Not of riches or grandeur, but of a life filled with love, stability, and possibility. The power of resilience. Maria's journey was far from over, but she faced the future with a strength she had never known she possessed. She had overcome unimaginable adversity, reclaimed her son, and found a community that embraced her. Though the scars of her past remained, they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as a testament to her resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and justice could prevail. The courtroom battles and public spectacles were behind her, but for Maria, the journey of rebuilding her life and ensuring a bright future for Daniel was only beginning. With each passing day, Maria found herself embracing the new opportunities life had presented. She was no longer a victim defined by her struggles but a survivor carving a path of hope and resilience. The community rises. The community center, where Maria worked tirelessly, had become a hub of activity and transformation. Under Evelyn James's leadership and Maria's passion, the center expanded its programs to include tutoring, art therapy, and support groups for single parents. Maria quickly became a cornerstone of the center's success, and her work with children drew the attention of local philanthropists. Her story, once a tale of despair, now inspired change. At a community fundraiser held in her honor, Evelyn approached Maria with the surprising announcement. "Maria," Evelyn began, her voice warm with pride, "we've received a grant from the city to open a new wing of the center. And we want to name it after you." Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. "After me? Evelyn, I don't know what to say." "You've earned this," Evelyn replied. "Your courage and dedication have touched so many lives. It's only fitting that your name becomes a symbol of hope." Daniel's bright horizon. Daniel's transformation continued to amaze everyone around him. His natural talent for drawing blossomed under the guidance of a local artist who volunteered at the center. The once quiet boy who clung to his mother now walked confidently through the halls of his school, his artwork displayed proudly on bulletin boards. At a school art fair, Daniel presented a series of drawings that told the story of his life with Maria, his memories of the streets, their struggles, and their triumphs. One drawing, in particular, captured the attention of everyone who saw it. A simple yet powerful image of a woman holding a child's hand as they walked toward a rising sun. When asked about it, Daniel explained, "It's me and my mama. She's my hero." Maria, watching from the crowd, fought back tears. In that moment, she realized the depth of the impact her love and perseverance had on her son. Clara's promotion. Clara Hayes's unwavering dedication to justice had not gone unnoticed. Her superiors at the police department recognized her efforts during the Thornhills case and her ongoing work to reform the foster care system. She was promoted to head of a new task force dedicated to protecting vulnerable families and investigating cases of exploitation. Though Clara was honored, she remained grounded. "This isn't just a job to me," she told her team during their first meeting. "It's a mission. We're here to make sure no one falls through the cracks again." Her friendship with Maria deepened, and the two women often reflected on their shared journey. Clara's visits to Maria's home became a cherished routine, and Daniel affectionately referred to her as Auntie Clara. Karen's nationwide movement. Karen Olmsted's reporting on the Thornhills case had turned her into a household name, and her investigative journalism sparked a nationwide conversation about class disparity and systemic corruption. She launched a non-profit organization dedicated to giving a voice to the voiceless, focusing on stories of marginalized communities. Karen often consulted Maria for her insight and perspective, ensuring that the organization remained true to its mission. "Your story changed lives, Maria," Karen said during one of their meetings. "And with your help, we can change even more." Maria agreed to join the nonprofit's advisory board, a role that allowed her to advocate for policies and programs that supported families in need. The Thornhills' final chapter. Olivia Thornhill's time in prison was marked by defiance and denial. She refused to accept responsibility for her actions, blaming everyone but herself for her downfall. Her attempts to manipulate fellow inmates and guards were met with resistance, leaving her increasingly isolated. Henry Thornhill, however, took a different path. Over time, he began to express genuine remorse for his actions. He participated in rehabilitation programs and wrote letters of apology to Maria and others he had wronged. Though Maria never responded, she found a small measure of peace knowing that he was trying to atone. The Thornhills empire, once a symbol of opulence and influence, was dismantled. Their properties were sold, their assets liquidated, and their legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and hubris. Maria's dream realized. One evening, after a long day at the community center, Maria returned home to find a letter waiting for her. It was from a local housing organization that had partnered with the center. She opened it with trembling hands and gasped as she read the contents. She had been approved for a mortgage to purchase her first home. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement as Maria and Daniel visited potential houses. They finally found one that felt perfect. A small, cozy home with a garden in the back where Daniel could play and Maria could plant flowers. On the day they moved in, Maria stood in the doorway, holding Daniel's hand. She looked around at the freshly painted walls, the sunlit rooms, and the yard filled with possibilities. "Is this real, Mama?" Daniel asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Maria knelt down and hugged him tightly. "Yes, mi amor. This is our home. We're finally home." A celebration of hope. To mark the opening of the new wing of the community center, Evelyn organized a celebration. The event brought together everyone who had played a role in Maria's journey: Clara, Karen, Evelyn, and countless others who had supported her along the way. As Maria stood on the stage to give a speech, she looked out at the faces of the people who had become her family. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you for believing in me, for standing by me when I had nothing, and for helping me find my way. This center, this community, has shown me that we're stronger together. And I promise to do everything I can to give back the hope you've given me." The applause that followed was deafening, a testament to the impact Maria had made. A legacy of love. As the years passed, Maria continued to thrive. She became a leader in her community, a role model for others who faced adversity. Daniel grew into a kind and talented young man, carrying forward the lessons of resilience and love that his mother had taught him. Their story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the strength of the human spirit could prevail. Together, Maria and Daniel proved that justice, though hard won, was worth fighting for, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. When we have nothing, we still have love. And with love, we can build everything. Maria Lopez. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.